a new form of kind of Western chauvinism. This is a civilisational nationalism and so on that we've been discussing, but one which does not care for the institutions at all, right? So it's very different to what governed in the 1950s, for example. So what you're going to get is kind of a worst of both worlds, where you get neither kind of social justice, decolonial, whatever, but you get the destruction of institutions and the destruction of professions, which have a role to play, provided that they are true to the purpose and the practice of their professions, rather than the pursuit of extraneous social justice aims.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga.
We're going to do George's jokes live on air.
No,
Your
George,
suicide.
Go.
it's special for the two of you.
Reveal yourself to the audience.
Sorry,
No?
is that introduce myself?
No, no. Reveal your true comedic wit to the audience.
No, they couldn't handle it.
Yeah. Welcome back to Bunga Cast. This is the Global Politics Podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochul in Sao Paulo, Brazil, joined by George Hoare in London and Lee Jones in London. Hello, both.
Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
Well, because we are doing the letters to the editor, and we have a long list of things to get through today, and I'm looking forward to debating some of the episodes. You'll be familiar with what we do here, I guess, listener, by this stage. But if you're not, and if you're new to us, these are the listener questions and comments that we've received. Some people send things in, even by WhatsApp. You know, if you're part of the real inner circle there. Comments on the episodes, and also this is also a way for us kind of editors of the podcast to digest what we've done over the past month, reconceptualize what's come out over the past month, and also kind of think in kind of more theoretical terms about what it all means and pull it all together. So that's what we're going to do. One little editorial comment, I guess, before we start. If you haven't heard, our central themes for this year, and perhaps longer than that going forward, are 5, and I wanted to just spell these out once again. It's state capitalism, the pre-political, militarism and war, irrationalism and unfreedom, and political recombination. Some of these maybe need more unpacking than others do, but I'm sure they will become apparent to you as we go through in talking about what we do, and also in kind of listening to the episodes that will come out this year. I guess in some ways you could categorize these by discipline, so one is state capitalism is political economy, the pre-political is sociology, militarism and war is international relations, irrationalism and freedom is political theory, ideology, and political recombination is political science. But I'm not sure that's even a useful way of thinking about this, because as we'll explore through all the episodes that we do, a lot of these issues and questions are kind of wide-ranging, can be looked at from different approaches, not just in a kind of academic, disciplinary way. And in fact, that's never what we've tried to do anyway on this podcast, and we're not going to start now.
yeah, I see it more like a multi-tool, or a Swiss Army knife or a penknife to, lots of different useful tools to analysing the current moment, and for.
And which are you? Are you a useful tool or?
We can let the listeners decide. I think maybe like a knife, a sharp knife, incisive, and I'm trying to think.
Are you a useful tool? Is a bit like, when did you stop beating your wife? Anyway, let's get started. I want to tell you what's coming up also. Before we go look back at what we've done the past month, we've got Muskism, the new book by Quinn Slobodian and Ben Tarnoff, looking at Elon Musk, not just biographically, but as representing in his business dealings and in general persona a new form of, or new way of organizing capitalism akin to Fordism of the 20th century. So that's Muskism. We're going to be dealing with the end of multilateralism with Tom Chodor. We will be discussing flying cars, the declining rate of profit, and the way that technological development has decelerated. That'll be in the reading club. We're going to be doing that with Lee Phillips as well. He's going to be joining along for that. Very much looking forward to that, and also maybe leaning on Lee's experience and insight into those areas, as I'm very much not a technologist. We also have Why Queer Theory Must Be Abolished with Ran Heilbrunn, and Logistics and Labor, and also Trains, if that makes sense. Trains is the topic of Damage Issue 6, so we'll be kicking off some discussions around that, as well as looking at logistics and labor organizing around that, and maybe some other things which I may have missed. But anyway, you'll see that as it comes out, but all that to look forward to. Now, let's get started with the listener questions. We're going to start with the most recent episode, but one, because the one that's just come out, episode 536, Can Racism Be Overcome Within Capitalism, which is Alex Gurovich's conversation with Paul Gomberg, that has just come out. So there's not really many comments on that yet. We will leave that to next time. But taking the most recent episode, which was, I guess, Divided Opinion, episode 535, Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Conservatism, with Matt McManus. Nigel B. Opinion said, worst guest in a long time, sorry. Sonvin said, thank you for this attempt to explain your former co-host's new Twitter persona. So I had to look this up. I didn't quite understand what this was in reference to, but then there's former, but then with a question mark. So I assume this refers to Phil and to Phil's new Twitter persona. So I went and looked up in the transcript of the discussion to try to figure out what this might have referred to. And Matt McManus, the guest, says at one point, and very often this pastiche-like sense of identity is one that's arranged by the material that they encounter in digital spaces, that being the postmodern right, the postmodern right encounter in digital spaces, whether we're talking about Reddit or X, Twitter, etc. Which is why you can go online and you'll find people identifying as white nationalist Nietzschean Christians, or libertarians who nonetheless support tough on crime policies and strict borders and have nothing but praise for Trump using the American military to export values all around the world. So all this form of kind of recombinant postmodern ideology, indeed, one of the themes that we want to explore this year, is maybe what the person was referring to. But then that obviously means that I'm suggesting that that is what they are interpreting Phil's Twitter persona as, which, I'm not saying anything. I'm just proposing that as a possible interpretation.
So what? Phil's a white nationalist Nietzschean Christian. Is that the take home?
No, I don't think that's it.
The suggestion is that Phil has a pastiche sense of identity on Twitter. I would just correct that to say that this is not a new Twitter persona. He's always had that Twitter persona.
Maybe it's the algorithm's doing.
Sometimes the masks become the face, though, right? The Twitter persona becomes the real persona. I'm not saying that about Phil. I'm just saying that. That's why I'm not on Twitter, because
I'm not commenting on Phil at all, in fact.
I was becoming too pastiche-like, and you don't want to become a pastiche of yourself. It's too much.
Absolutely not.
I thought
maybe a parody of oneself, but not a pastiche, because that'd be rather gauche.
I couldn't quite understand the level of hate for this episode. I thought that idea that people are sort of stitching together, people on the right are stitching together this very online kind of combination of identity that's really not very serious or anchored in a way. I thought that was the most insightful comment on the episode, actually. And given that I spent like all last week being monstered on Twitter by self-declared white nationalists, that kind of rang true to me. I just thought the things that they're saying, calling me a race traitor and all this kind of stuff, do they really mean that? Are they really like antediluvian racists, or are they just basically edgelords who are stitching together a stupid online persona? I think it's probably the latter.
There's an element of play always involved, but of course it's a little bit like, rather than fake it till you make it, it's play around until you become it, or something like that. So I think there might be some
play around until you find out what you are.
Yeah, but to this point, specifically to the point of why people dislike the episode, I think Eli S has a comment as to this, and we can evaluate whether we agree, that McManus elides too many leftist own goals. The recent iteration of the millennial populist left was overly compatible with the features of what became the radical right. So he identifies two: The first is Schmittianism, and the second one is retrofuturism. Schmittianism, Eli comments, Alex has talked to me, I've talked plenty about this. Leftists should hear Charlie Kirk echoing their Schmittianism back to them and self-criticize. You cannot have a universalist, emancipatory, revolutionary politics. You simply cannot weave together the necessary coalition if you base your episteme and argumentation on the friend-enemy distinction. And then secondly, on retrofuturism, again, BungaCast has made this critique repeatedly, except for a few precious interjections regarding, for example, computerized socialist planning or fully automated luxury communism. The main effective driver of the millennial left and its main program for governance was a nostalgic return to an imagined post-World War II social democratic consensus. In fact, worse, because it was in many ways an attempt to go back in time and create the world that would have come about if the 1968ers, the boomer left, had actually won, but in our present day and based upon our present conditions. So to conclude the point, I think Eli says that we now find ourselves in a situation, at least here in the States, but in many other countries, where at best the left is a cross-class coalition of the highly educated set against the right as a cross-class coalition of the credentialed. Just one comment on this. I think as to the retrofuturism of the millennial left, I think that's right, but it's specifically trying to recreate the conditions of the 1960s, but without the sense of social consensus or notion of a mainstream necessary for those social democratic policies. A lot of the millennial left have rejected that in favor of hyper pluralism or even hyper individualism. But then there's also an extra level of difficulty to that, which is as the fight against racism and sexism and other forms of discrimination has always been central to the left for the last 30 years, there was also an element of desiring a return to the 1950s racism and sexism to be able to overcome it once again, a kind of repetition of the 68ers, but in conditions in which the 68ers won. At least in cultural terms, the 68ers won, even if in their social vision as a whole, they were defeated. So yeah, and how does this then impact on McManus? I didn't disagree with a lot of what Matt McManus said. I think it's just maybe in criticizing the postmodernism of the right, Eli's point is, and I think I agree with this, is that it ends up ignoring the way in which the left has mirrored that and has, in a way, cultivated the conditions in which the postmodern right has become postmodern.
Yeah, I think saying that that you have postmodern conservatism as like everybody who's postmodern is on the right is obviously completely not true. But I do think some of the things that Matt was talking about around, the postmodern right has these two elements, one around truth and the other around meaning, that it taps into people's, skepticism or worry or kind of concern about the lack of sources of truth, the lack of sources of meaning. It did make me think that the right was always better placed to, like, in a postmodern society to thrive, because if you say one of the starting points of the right is the reaction against the French Revolution, then ideas of universal truth and kind of universal meaning have always been treated with skepticism by conservatives like Burke. So I think there isn't a way in which the left is insufficiently modern even today, and that's the problem. And so the right is kind of capitalizing on the lack of a defensive modernism more than anything else, and it should really be the left who are able to say, here's what truth is, here's what meaning is, and that is clearly absent.
Okay, one other comment, two more comments on this episode. Picky Bun says, interesting episode, but I'm on the critical side. The problem is that McManus understands the libertinism and social progressivism that came alongside neoliberal hegemony as phenomena that were in tension with leftism. No, they were seen as the portals into power by those leftist progressivists who had been shut out of governance when the neoliberal turn occurred. Any leftist who cannot reckon with the damage caused by that strategy of promoting social progressivism as a form of leftist politics has either A, nor clue, or B, is seeking to enter professions cynically or sincerely that ideologically reproduce progressivism. Most telling is McManus's appraisal of Mamdani. Mamdani has quote unquote youthful energy and optimism when compared to the dour and sullen Republicans. It's such a shame that time machines have not been invented because McManus is apparently desperate to travel back to 2008 and relive the many victories of the millennial left. Maybe Mamdani is a net positive, I don't know, and don't care because I'm not American or a New Yorker. What is certain is that the high estimation of such political concepts is bound to throw socialist politics back into Obama period idealism. And then finally, Noah Cole says, I don't understand the backlash in these comments. And I personally think that if you're going to make scornful comments, you should substantiate them. Otherwise, it's just trolling. I thought this was a clear and insightful description of the current situation. Nothing entirely new as far as I'm concerned, but well argued and timely. I especially liked the point on right-wing utopias and goodwill, and whether the left should lend any credence to them. Todd McGowan is good on this in Enjoyment Left and Right, and I would agree with him that any political goal of the contemporary hard right is really just a pretext for living out your aggression. Lee, do you have a comment, or should we move on? You want to say something?
I broadly agree with that comment. I'm not familiar with that piece, Enjoyment Left and Right. It might be something we want to look at because Todd McGowan's always great value.
It is good, Enjoyment Left and Right. I do recommend Jouissance every once in a while. Let's move on then. We had a double episode, which both Leigh and I participated in. First was on, is this a paleo-con foreign policy with JF Trollet? And one specifically then looking at the Americas and is there a doctrine called Dunroe with Juan Rojas? Firstly, just on the Juan Rojas episode, Graham Harrison says great stuff. I think the National Resistance Army would qualify as a multinational insurgency. Ugandan guerrilla forces against Tito Okello that involved Rwandans, including at leadership level. That is interesting. I wasn't aware of that. This is in relation to, I guess, Venezuelan and Colombian guerrillas. A more involved comment in relation to, well, I guess in a way, both of these episodes, but specifically the question about paleo-con foreign policy, the ideological roots of the radical right's international vision, and it as it plays out in Trump's foreign policy. So Szilard Papp got in touch to say, I was listening to the latest BungaCast episode and it's really good. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a piece on my Substack in Hungarian about how the Atlanticist free world paradigm has visibly fractured over the past year. In the post-war period, of course, this ideology united North America and Western Europe and later legitimated the expansion of this geopolitical alliance to Central and Eastern Europe. I argue that the emerging rupture demands ideological responses that will likely come from the ascendant radical right, which currently lacks a coherent answer to the new geopolitical reality. I also argue that European politics will be shaped by competition between two right-wing frameworks, a clash of civilizations, and on the other hand, a European independence discourse. So far, this is very similar to what you've been discussing on the pod, but I think there are two aspects that need to be added. Firstly, the entire civilizational paradigm is actually well suited to papering over the rupture within the Atlanticist framework. From a European perspective, it can be used to argue that although Washington is now demanding greater subservience and more contributions to the maintenance of US hegemony, it is still worth it. Otherwise, we will all be, he notes ironically here, greatly replaced by Muslims and others. In that sense, a largely seamless transition from the free world to the Western civilization discourse could occur, especially if it helps preserve the material basis of the transatlantic alliance. The free world narrative itself arguably contained a racialized undertone from the start, West versus East, democracy versus autocracy, open versus closed society, and so on, hence the ease of the transition. Now, secondly, both the civilizational and European independence paradigms are fundamentally right-wing. However, by focusing on paleoconservatism, I think you frame the issue as dealing with one specific ideological school, trend, or niche. In doing so, you may have missed the potential of these two tendencies to become hegemonic, in the sense of subsuming a wide range of schools of thought and accommodating both a left and a right within themselves. On the left wing of civilizational discourse, a form of free world liberalism could survive. So, in quotations, we respect gay people unlike those Arabs, we are democratic unlike those backward Easterners, etc. While the right-wing form of such a discourse, one would find ideas such as white supremacy or the glorification of apartheid-era South African Rhodesia, as Elon Musk has done. Similarly, within the European independence discourse, there's room for anti-American anti-capitalism, pro-China third worldism, as well as the anti-migration isolationism of a fortress Europe. So yeah, I think the latter point is that one would find I think the latter point is the most important, which is how certain ideological niches could broaden into hegemonies able to contain many different niches at once. Anyways, great stuff as always. Comments, right? Lots to comment on here. Maybe Lee, you want to come in?
Yeah, so it's an interesting comment on the first point about the idea of a civilisational paradigm as a way of maybe papering over some of the cracks and maintaining the transatlantic alliance. I think that is right. If you look at the reaction to Marco Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference and you contrast that with the reaction to J.D. Vance's speech, for example, I think you can see how this works. He got a standing ovation. What was the content of his speech? This is why I was being monstered last week. It's that a white nationalist had clipped his speech and highlighted all the bits that he liked. And it was all the racist and imperialist bits. And so, I commented, well, it's racist. We live in a world where so many things are branded racist and imperialist, but this actually is. And for that, I got called a race traitor and so on. So, but that speech got a standing ovation in Munich because Rubio was reassuring them, right? We don't want to abandon you. America is a child of Europe. We have shared values, but the values that he talked about are all values of, conquest, expansion, all this kind of stuff. So I think this is a very good point. I do think that there is a tension though between the civilizational narrative and discourse that the Trumpists are pushing. And Mike Williams actually has a nice piece about this in the latest Jacobin, which is worth having a look at, and the aggressive promotion of national interest. So I don't think you can say, "Oh, we're part of we're part of a shared civilization. We need to work together." Blah blah blah. At the same time that you're threatening to take over the territory of one of your allies, for example, or hammering them and intervening in their domestic politics. There is just simply a tension between these two bits of radical right ideology. And as we discussed on the episode with JF, if the radical right did come to power in Europe, lots of these radical right parties they're not sold on the Trump on Trump and Trumpism. They've tried to professionalize themselves, make themselves look reasonable. There is anti-Americanism in European nationalism. So I think it's not quite as simple as the comment suggests that civilizationism can just paper all of the cracks. There are lots of cracks and lots of contradictions.
Yeah.
On the second point about the idea that civilizationalism and European independence, these sort of right-wing tropes could become hegemonic ideologies. I agree with the idea that there can be sort of left and right, if you like, versions of these ideologies. But I just think the idea that this can be hegemonic is for the birds, really. Like the problem why I don't think that right-wing populism, national populism, or the radical right can be hegemonic is that they don't have anything meaningful to say about political economy. They don't have a political economy model to replace neoliberalism. They mutate and they tweak neoliberalism a bit, but they don't have a replacement for it. And I don't see how you can build consent on the thin gruel of ideology alone. That said, I am quite interested in what Giorgia Meloni is managing to achieve in Italy. I'm no expert on Italian politics, but I think we should probably do an episode on Meloni to see why she has proven to have a lot more staying power than her predecessors, why she is so popular. Because my understanding is she's done absolutely nothing to address the political economy question. She's clung to the EU. She has, a leading EU technocrat as her chief economic advisor. She's clung to NATO. There's a lot of hammering migrants, and there's a lot of culture war stuff like banning gay people from adopting kids. That seems to be working for her. So maybe I'm wrong.
I think if you talk about the thin gruel of ideology, that's not, it's not always thin gruel. Like sometimes, I mean, Huel, for one, to take one case, that's actually quite successful. People don't seem to think that it's thin gruel.
It's like that scene in Peter Pan where they're imagining this feast, and they feast well, even if it's all imaginary stuff.
But I think I think your point is that it is correct, though, that without any fundamental change in the economic structure of society, like low growth, low productivity countries, there's only so long that you can be rebranding the thin gruel as Huel, or like, oh, it's help you lose weight, or actually it's not that bad, or it's always been like this. There is a point at which people will, your political project will have limits if it doesn't attend to some of these really deep problems, and these that can only really be answered by material questions. But I wanted to because I'm both a listener for these double A side episodes, and also,
wait, if you can ask some question, do you mind if I just comment on what we've just discussed before moving on?
Sure.
Just because on the hegemony point, I mean, I think this is one of the fundamental questions, which is that the populist challenge to technocracy has been based in large part on feeding people ideology, right? On a much bigger scale, which is in some ways, one aspect of the end of history. I noticed this very clearly with like Bolsonaro's challenge to the certain kind of progressive technocracy of the Workers' Party and what came before it, which is just like, I'm going to rule on kind of not really pushing through any policies, not really driving forward any kind of institutional change, but just kind of breaking stuff, move fast, break things, and make a lot of ideological claims, which works for the base, but maybe doesn't work for everybody. And I think one of the big questions on this, and we can think about Meloni's rhetoric against migrants, for example, is that, well, what does it provide people? Well, it provides people with a notion of inside and outside, and it makes claims about which citizens are inside and which citizens or indeed non-citizens are to be excluded. That is the basis, I guess, of the political economy of the thing, and indeed that's been Orban's modus operandi in his own way as well. Ultimately, a lot of I agree with Lee that hegemonic probably not in the sense of actually mobilizing people's enthusiasm in some way for these political groupings and forms beyond their bases. But a lot of it still rests on the basic condition of contemporary politics, which is civic privatism. To the extent that people aren't revolting in response to economic conditions, the thing can kind of continue on. And I think that's probably why Meloni's been successful, in that she's basically is the new form of conservatism, of continuity politics, which is always the default of government. And she's just come in and provided some, a bit more ideological gruel to subsist on. And unless people are kind of revolting, that can kind of continue.
I mean, I think that's true, but that's because the order that we have is now non-hegemonic, right? But there's no counter-hegemonic challenger, so the thing can just roll on and decay. But I think, if we go back to your point about insiders and outsiders, right? Think about what the way that Lenin understood imperialism, social imperialism in the 19th century. That was in part based on the idea that you can participate in the exploitation of non-white people, so you gain a kind of satisfaction out of that. But it was also based on sharing the spoils, the economic spoils. It wasn't only based on just racist ideology. And likewise, if you look at what Orban is doing in Hungary, it's not true to say that it's merely thin ideological gruel, right? One of the reasons why Hungary is in this geopolitical position where it is, not wanting to sanction Russia, wanting strong relations with China, being inside the EU, but being a critic and NATO, but then being a critic of the Ukraine war. It's not just because Orban is some kind of wacky guy with an idiosyncratic ideology. It's because the political economy model in Hungary rests on combining Chinese investment and technology, German investment, offshoring manufacturing, cheap Russian gas, and access to the EU market. So that there is a material basis to what some of these regimes are trying to do.
But I mean, in that case, it's continuity neoliberalism. I mean, the political economy of Hungary
Sure, it's
hasn't shifted
mutated
so much.
neoliberalism, but it looks like Orban might lose power soon. He's certainly on the ropes. So even though it's been relatively successful for a couple of decades, it's not a stable hegemonic order. I suppose that's what I'm saying. So, and I suppose just to kind of wrap up this engagement with this particular listener is, what we were trying to do with this episode was to explain American foreign policy. It wasn't to explain the trajectory of the West per se. So I think we can certainly think more
Nor indeed
about,
of the radical right ideological basis as a whole. I mean,
we could only talk about that quite briefly, what that might look like in Europe. This certainly needs further exploration.
hello, friends. You've reached the end of the free part of the episode. Well, we put out 2 entirely free episodes a month. The rest is for subscribers. For access, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself, Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Lee Jones, Amberly Frost, Catherine Liu, Alex Gurevich, Ryan Zickgraf, and Lee Phillips, as well as a huge number of guests. In 2026, our priorities are to explore the following themes: emerging state capitalism, war and militarism, political recombinations and new revolts, irrationalism and unfreedom and how to challenge these ideas, and the pre-political, or the social bases on which politics may be built. We'll also be exploring these themes through the BungaCast Reading Club, through a selection of classic essays, book chapters, films, and academic articles. If you sense history accelerating but feel that we have no control over events, then join us as we try to find political clarity to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.